My name is David Patera. I will be walking you guys through dRofus today and how it can be used to simplify your planning. And we actually are going to go through design. So if you can go through this top right here, we have planning, design, build, manage. We're going to go through the first two. So without further ado, the first thing I'd like to talk about is what types of markets is dRofus used on. And the very first caveat that I'm going to bring to this entire demonstration is my background is 10 years as a healthcare architect prior to joining dRofus. So my demonstration today will be on a healthcare facility, and that's how I'm going to walk you through the early planning into the design. But I want you to remember while I'm doing this that dRofus is used on essentially every project type that there is. But the only thing that I personally have not seen dRofus used on is a single home residential. But other than that, we're essentially used on every project type, from convention centers to airports to office buildings and the demo that I'm going to do today, which is healthcare. So what is dRofus and how does it help in your planning and design? The very first thing we'll talk about is the fact that dRofus is part of a common data environment. It is a single source of truth. It is a database application that will connect to your design tools. Today, we're going to demonstrate that with Revit. And how that works, throughout the life cycle of a project, all the way from early planning. We are not going to get all the way into dRofus during construction or occupancy, but it'll kind of allude to it during the demonstration today. So for all those that don't know how dRofus is typically positioned, it is usually positioned right in the center of the project team. It has bidirectional connections with Revit. For anybody that uses ArchiCAD, that as well. IFC, you'll see down at the bottom. That's for any software that we do not have a direct connection with. So anything with Bentley systems or Tekla, we would be able to go back and forth between those systems. And we also connect to construction software, which we're not going to talk a lot today, which would be Calibri and Navisworks. We won't talk a lot about it today, but we do also have a bidirectional connection with Excel. That's a very effective way of pushing and pulling information, existing standards that you may have into the database and pushing it into a Revit model and so on. But more important than all these softwares, which are great, is the fact that dRofus is a collaboration tool. And every single user on the project team will have access to it. Every single user will have a personalized username and password. And this will allow them to log into this cloud application and to see all of the project specific information. Without further ado, I'm going to jump into dRofus, and we will walk through the actual software here. Give me 1 second. Once I log into dRofus, this is the home screen. So like I said before, each user has a login and a password that gives them specific permissions. When you get into dRofus, not everybody is going to be able to access everything. That will be controlled by whoever's in charge of the database. Let's open up the Rooms module and start talking about dRofus and how we can navigate it and how this will help during our planning. So on the left, you're going to see what we call the function structure. This is essentially your departments, right? So you click on the administration department, it's going to show you all the rooms in administration. If I click on the pediatrics department, it's going to show me all the rooms in pediatrics. If I click on this caret here, it's going to break down and say, well, there's actually 2 sub-departments inside of pediatrics, station A and B, and we can break those rooms down as well. One very important thing to note on this one, everything in the function structure is completely customizable, meaning I can have whatever numbering system I want here. I can have whatever nomenclature I need, and I can have as many levels of depth as I need to customize to your planning and programming style. So it could be department right away, which is what I'm showing right here. It could be a very large master plan on a campus that then breaks down into a building and then departments, and then from there, sub-departments. Sky's the limit, and as you can see, it doesn't have to be standardized across all of your different functions. One other thing to note as I'm going through this demonstration, I touched on it briefly with the fact that each person has a different login, but we'll expand on this more in the presentation. Every mouse click that we ever do inside of the database is logged and tracked. It is an evolving database, meaning that we're going to be able to compare what a project looked like in the first quarter of its existence with the second quarter of its existence, and how did those variations occur. We'll talk more about that as we get through this. So we just went through the function structure, and when I clicked on the department or a function, it would show the rooms inside there. That's the next part that we're going to talk about and how that helps in planning and programming. dRofus is very room-centric, which aids in its connection with Revit, which is also the same same concept where rooms are quite important. Inside of dRofus rooms, there are three main parts. The first part you're seeing already on the right-hand side. If I click on a room, it's going to pull up the properties for that room. So that would be the room name, a room description, room numbers. Any programmed versus designed areas could go down here. Groups and classification systems. So if we had Omni tables that we wanted to classify or master specs, we could add those as well. All of that is the property, and that's information that's relevant to a single and individualized room. The other pieces of information that are relevant to a room are the room data sheets and the item lists. And what I'm going to do is open up room templates to talk about those two pieces. So I'm going to go down to this office template first, and I'm just going to double click it, and it's going to open this up. We already talked about the properties of a room, but the other one that we want to talk about is room data. So room data in a room, if you're thinking about it, is the abstract information that we need to track for a specific room type. So if I go into this, what is the occupancy load of a particular room? Or what's the width of the perimeter of that room? Or does that room need wall protection? It's not specifying the exact wall protection, it's just saying, does it need wall protection? And you can have as many parameters, as many tabs as you want to track information that's relevant during your specific project types. This goes back to what I said at the very beginning of the presentation. We can be used on essentially any project type because we're customizable. So all of these tabs could be named something different. You can have as many as you want. You can have as many sections as you want. So I have a door section here, and I can have as many parameters or fields as I want in there. I can have drop-down menus, text fields, number fields, you name it. That's up to you guys. And one of the really powerful parts about it is this customization. This is done by you. It is not, you're not needed to come back to dRofus and ask us to do anything. It doesn't take a programmer. It's somebody with the skill set of an architect or interior designer or a BIM manager that could definitely do this. So that's the aspect of a room data sheet. The next concept that we want to talk about in a room, so we've talked about the properties, the room data sheet, and the next one is the, and I'm going to skip images and documents, we're going to come back to that, is the idea of items lists. So if I click on an items list, this is essentially going to show me all of the equipment that I'm planning in that list. Just like everything else inside of dRofus, this is completely customizable, meaning I can have as many lists as I want, and I can call them anything I want. So I have one here called FF&E. I have another one called electrical, door, mechanical. I could, if this was a hospital, and it is, but I don't have one, I could have a list called medical equipment. I could have door hardware as a list. It's up to you, and it's up to the project and what's important for you and your owner or your client and what you want to track. It goes back to the adage, just because we can track it doesn't mean we need to. So we'll only track what makes sense for that particular project and project type. So in here, we talked about how we have the fact that we have items. And the next thing that we're going to talk about is, well, what is an item? So I'm going to close this out. We're not going to save any changes. And I'm going to go to the items register. And we're going to see this structure that looks kind of like the function structure. This is our items structure, just like everything else in dRofus, completely customizable, different nomenclatures and numbering systems if you want. I'm going to go to a CT scanner because it's the one I always use. And when I click on that, we're going to pull this up. And we're going to look at the parts of an item. And so one thing to note on an item is something that is concrete, meaning it is something you place in a room. And so you saw those items lists. We had FF&E, and I said you could have medical equipment. You probably noticed that there was also a finishes section. Carpet is an item you put in a room. Paint is put on a wall, even though it's very thin. And they do have properties, and often they have images that you have to track. So if you're doing a spec book or a product catalog for a client. And so if we get into this CT scanner, let's talk about the parts of an item. Very similar to a room, there's the properties. There's classification codes, and we can have the name and the number of that item. If we wanted to, we could have pricing on that item. Instead of room data, we have item data, and that's these tabs down here. Just like room data, they're completely customizable. But one very significant difference between room data and item data is that item data will vary based on the functionality of the equipment. So what does that mean? This is a CT scanner that I have clicked here. And it's asking me to put in what are the electrical and data requirements. So if I was the engineer on the project and the electrical engineer, I could come through and say, well, yeah, it needs backup power and probably UPS. if I were to switch to a different type of equipment, let's say furniture, and go to a stackable chair, for instance, it wouldn't make sense for it to ask me, does that chair plug in? Because it's a chair. And you'll notice that that tab goes away. But what you'll notice it also does is it adds an additional one. So does it have an upholstery? On this particular chair, it doesn't. It's just a plastic chair, but it could. And again, that's up to you. So you'll go through and based on very simplistic rules, set up how you want this to go. And this is how you'll minimize the amount of information that your users see when they're planning their project. They only see what's relevant for the project type or the item type or the room type. Let's go back to that CT scanner here. We're gonna open this up. So we have these different tabs of information, and you'll notice that there is an image here. You'll also notice, and I don't know if I have a document here, but there's a documents folder. I don't, it's blank. There's a documents folder here where we can add PDFs and Excel documents and so on. This is any information that you wanna share with the entire project team. And so you'll notice that every single item has the ability to have images and documents. If I go back to the rooms module, every single department does as well. And if we go to any one of the rooms, every single room does as well. So we can add documents to the project. We can add documents to a department. We can have documents and images to a room, and we can have documents and images to an item. And so all of this information can be shared across the entire project in a single location, and this is all shareable information. So I opened up this tab here called Room Templates, and we talked about the fact that there's room data and that there's item data. We talked about images and documents as well. Let's go back to this concept of templates because it's an extremely important aspect inside of dRofus. And that is the ability to plan and design using templative or type-based items or objects. So in this department right now, I have a dental department, and if I sort by room and name, it's gonna organize these. And I can look at this and notice there's a bunch of rooms that are all the same. Rather than go through and fill out the room data for each of these rooms one by one, I have the ability to simply right click on there, or I could do it from the ribbon at the top. And I can say, add all that data from a template. Now I've already done that. If you look at it right here, it says from a template. I'm gonna kind of scroll over here. You'll say, it says from multiple templates. And one of these I changed to say, well, instead of being from 35, we'll have it derived from 35. And so let's look at like what that means. So if I go to template 35, I'm gonna open up one of these rooms, and you'll notice it has the name automatically gets populated into it. If I go to the room data tab, the description of that room gets populated into it. Design building requirements, there's wall mount equipment, that automatically comes from the template. It says from the template. If I try to check or uncheck any of these, I can't, and that's by design because the template is controlling that. So if I wanted to go through and edit those, let's just see real quick how many rooms there are. If I wanted to edit those rooms real quick, those 6 rooms, or 7 rooms, sorry, 6 rooms, those 6 rooms, I would just edit the template once and they would all get the update. Now you'll notice this one that I mentioned earlier is derived. And so what's the difference here? This is your one-offs. As architects and designers, we love to say that we're typology or typology-based design, but then we like to break our own rules all the time or immediately into design. So we may start in early programming and planning with different typology-based rules, but then as we actually get into the project, we sit down with the owners, we have user group meetings, and there's changes that are made, we can go through and make exceptions. So if I go through to this one, you can see down here, there's little red dashes here. And what it's saying is, this is based on room template 35, but everywhere where you see a red is where we're deviating from that a little. So if I click on this room, then it says in here, it says, okay, well, this protection right here, originally the value was blank, meaning there was no more protection required for a door in that room. On this one-off one, we added a requirement for protection. Or if we went to the electrical power here and we hover in here, it's gonna say, well, the original requirement for the outlet was just 1. We've changed that to 14 in this one. So that's the idea of how we can look at this derived versus based on a template. One other thing we're gonna talk about, because you'll notice these red tabs, I'm gonna double click on one of these rooms. We'll do this derived one as well. And that is I can go through here and I can click on and change the logs, or not change the logs, view the logs. And we're gonna hit okay here. It popped up on my other screen, I apologize. And we're gonna view the logs for every single change that has ever occurred in this room from the beginning of this database till today. And this is gonna be a pretty big log because this database is probably 4 or 5 years old that I've been utilizing. And I have a screen popped up somewhere on here that I cannot get to. There we go. All right, and so this is the logs right here. So this is generating a log saying, okay, since the admin of this project to today, this is every change that's ever occurred in this database. And it will show the property where that has occurred, what the old value was, what the new value was, when that occurrence changed, and who it was that changed it. So this is showing the logs that I mentioned early on, and showing all the different ways we could filter it. Show me all the changes that occurred yesterday, or show me just what's occurred today. And it should pop up with nothing because I haven't made any changes to it. That's correct. And this is very big brotherish. If you're a BIM manager, this is very powerful to try to figure out what's going on in a project and why there are changes. But if you're a project manager, if you're a planner, this is extremely useful to sitting down with your clients. And you can sit there and go, well, what's going on with the budget? Why is it going over? Well, back in June, this was the equipment we had in a project. Now in August, after 14 user groups meetings, it's gone up by this. We can also use it during user groups. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Is I'm going to go through here and I'm going to create a change list. And actually, we're going to we're going to go in here and we're going to say show log. I can just hit it. Give me 1 second here. I think I canceled this. We're going to hit here. It says start a change list. And I'm going to say create a new one called, it's the hardware set meeting for the doors. Whatever it may be. And we're going to come here. I could add some notes to what this is. And I'm going to say, okay. And what it's saying is although we track and log everything in this database, during this particular meeting, and now that you've started this change list, we're going to bracket these in a special bucket so that in the future, if you want to see those changes, you can find them really fast. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, well, let's go to the door hardware tab. And we're going to go through and we're going to make some changes. Now I could do this to a template. I'm going to just do it to this room. I'm going to remove some of the requirements here. I'm going to add a requirement for no window and I'm going to hit save. And then I could stop the change list. What I'm going to do is just jump into the logs and we're going to hit, and I hit no, and I should have hit yes. So give it 1 second, unfortunately. Sorry about that. I'm running multiple screens on here. Yeah, it says no because it's going to take a little while to render that. Unfortunately, that was not a good thing to do during the presentation. Well, that's running. We'll come up. There we go. All right, so this has come back in. And what I'm going to do is rather than show the log, which is showing everything, which is why it took so long, I'm going to come in here and say, let's go to that hardware set meeting on doors that we had and show me what changed during that meeting. And so there it goes. So it goes through, it says, these are the changes we made. These are the old values. These are the new values. This is when it was changed. I could export this to an Excel document, forward this to everybody and say, hey, although everything's already tracked in the database and we're all on the same page, I'm also sending you these notes of what happened during this meeting because these are some significant changes. So you could email this out to everybody and now they have an overview of what just occurred. Or maybe you just inform a certain group of team members. So that's another kind of expansion on the logs. And we've talked about templates and we've applied templates. We've got this database and we talked earlier about how it can push and pull from Revit. Let's jump into Revit and let's talk about that. So I'm going to open up the Revit model. This is the clinic that's connected to that database. These are all the rooms that are in there. And you'll notice there's 3 on this level that are not yet placed. So that's the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to use Revit like you normally would and simply place a room. And so when I click on the rooms module and I drop a room into here, the very first thing it's going to do is it's going to open up dRofus inside of Revit because it knows it's connected to a database. And it's going to say, that's great that you're placing a room, but this project has already been programmed. So let's pick a room from the program. So I'm going to come through here and say, well, that's the secretary's office and link that. And then I can go through here and say, well, let's drop the superintendent's office in and double click that. And I didn't drop it the first time. And for some reason, let me make sure I'm logged in, which is maybe my issue. I apologize. And we'll try it again because Revit is not actually dropping the room in there, which is a little different than normal. Huh. Let's try one more thing. Of course, on a live demo, this is always the fun part about it. And we are going to log out and try dropping a room and seeing if this is a Revit issue. Nope. And what we're going to do is we're going to log back in And we're going to just do it. So now you're seeing me do the log in, log out. And you can also see me not type my password correctly. So that's always fun. There we go. There we go. And rather than drop the room, because I couldn't get to it, we're going to do this a separate way. We're going to go into the dRofus tab, and we're going to simply link it. So the room's already placed. I'm going to hit link. So this is if you had already placed some of the rooms and you want to link them after the fact. I'm going to click on that room, and I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to say, well, that's the secretary's office. And we're going to click on that and hit link. And then what it does is you'll notice it automatically pops out with information. So the room, what it did say new room, as soon as we linked it to the database, it came in with new information. So it said secretary's office is the name. It knows a room number. It knows that it's part of the dental department. You can see that also in the color coding. You can come through here, and if we scroll down even more, you can see that it knows what the room function number is. How does it know this information? And how does it selectively push some of these parameters in, but not all of these parameters? That's the next thing we're going to look at. So I'm going to open up the attribute configuration. This is something 99% of you would never see. I'm only opening it to kind of articulate a concept. This is pretty BIM managerish. This is not something that your typical designers, planners, and programmers would see. But what this is doing is this is showing where dRofus can connect to the model. So rooms in dRofus connect to Revit rooms. Systems in dRofus, and we haven't even talked about that. That will be the MEP one that we talked about at a later webinar, later date. Connect to the MEP systems inside the MEP models. Items, which we talked about already inside the dRofus, connect to Revit families. And we can connect to all Revit families, system families, in place, it doesn't matter, we can connect to them. And then we'll kind of skip down and we'll go into the MEP spaces can connect to rooms as well. So let's just look at the room-to-room connection, because that's what I just did was place a room. So if I go to the room-to-room connection and hit edit, it's going to show us all of the properties that exist for a room inside of dRofus. And in a typical project, there's somewhere between hundreds to thousands of them, depending on what you're looking at. And on the right-hand side, it's going to show you all the properties for a Revit room. And there's usually about 20 to 60. And down below, it's showing that interaction, right? So this is saying these properties right here, these are dRofus attributes or dRofus fields. And when we've connected that room, we're pushing data into the Revit model. And so here we had some finishes that we're pushing into the room finish module. Down below, it's the opposite, right? And typically what a typical project will do is put the majority of their data in the database and as little information as they can in Revit. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that, but the first one is efficiency. It makes your model leaner, lighter, and easier to use. Second off, the individuals that are using dRofus do not have to have access to Revit. So you don't have to have people logging into Revit. They can log into dRofus, they can have that information, it will show up inside the Revit models. This allows you to have more skilled individuals inside of, more model skilled individuals inside of Revit, but your highly experienced designers that may not have Revit experience can still contribute to the design. And that's a very powerful part to this. And so this information down here, though, is going the opposite direction. And this is information that you can only get from the model, right? So I can't in a database know for sure what level the room is, because you usually don't identify that in a program. You just identify what department it goes into. And I definitely can identify the area, and that's what's getting pushed here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a parameter, which is, does the room need a floor drain? Maybe my engineer went through and identified all the rooms that need floor drains inside of dRofus. I want to visualize that in Revit. So I'm going to hit new. It's going to push that data into the Revit model, hit close, hit OK. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this color coding to show me the color coding of that new parameter we just pushed in. And so if it is indeed, or if it does indeed need a floor plan, I want to highlight it in red so it really sticks out. So once I hit OK, it's going to generate some updated part inside of Revit. And then what it's going to do is it's going to highlight every single room in this project that's supposed to have a floor drain. So we could go through, and if you're an interior designer, you could say, show me all the rooms that have this paint type, and I can see it really quickly. Or show me all the rooms where we replace this chair type, or whatever it may be. Or you know, show me all the rooms that have a fire rating of this, and so on. And all of that information could have come through from the model, or vice versa, but the end result is that we can visualize it. So we're going to take this to another extreme, and I'm going to do this based on the programmed square footage versus the designed square footage. And so I'm going to click OK, and while this is generating, I'm going to jump back into dRofus, and we're going to look at this concept right here, which is if I click on a department here, we have two concepts in here: the programmed area, which is what the programmer or planner put in, and the designed area, which is what the room actually is after you model it in dRofus, or sorry, in Revit. And then we have another parameter in here, which is the difference. We have two of them actually: the difference as a percentage, and difference as a square footage. And so this is going through and it's saying, what is the difference between what we designed and what we planned? And what I did is I pushed that value back into here as a percentage so we could visualize it. If it was less than 1% off, or actually it was less than 3% off, it's coming in as white. And if it's between 3 and 5% off, it's coming in as a pink. And if it's integrated, it's coming in as a dark red. You guys could adjust the range to whatever you wanted and whatever's important, but you get the idea. And that is that you can then start to visualize data inside the model, any piece of data that you want. You know, what's the last time the room was edited? I can start to see that across the model. So the sky's the limit, and it becomes pretty powerful. We're going to undo this visualization and go back to the original one. And it goes back to the department. And we're going to talk about another comparison, because it's not just pushing and pulling parametric or parameter data, but it's the ability to start to visualize item-based information or family-based in Revit. So if I click on this room here, I'm going to click the items in the room, and it's going to pull up a dialog. And what it's going to do is it's going to show me two columns again. All of the equipment that's actually modeled in this room is on this left column where it says Revit. And on the right-hand column, it's going to show me all the equipment that we planned for this room. And so when I get into here, you're going to see right here, there's a couple issues. They're red. I'm not going to go through all of them. We'll look at these top two. And that first one is that we planned for this chair to be in here, but there isn't one. That chair's not seen in the Revit model. On the contrary, these two chairs are here. We never planned for them to be there. That's a mistake. That type of room shouldn't have those chairs. So whoever put those in, what I'm going to do is just fix it. All right. So we're going to go through here. I'm going to place this chair, and we put it in there. And although dRofus is extremely good at matching these and helping you to know what's supposed to go in each room, we've yet to figure out an algorithm so it knows where to place it. So yes, at the end, a designer still has to design the room and figure out where the chair goes. So I've placed that chair in there correctly. Notice the errors go away. So it's dynamic, it's instant. I can do this at a room by room level to validate my model against the design. I could click the down caret here, and I could do it on the entire level or the entire model. So that's the big idea behind the pushing and pulling of items and data. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump back into dRofus, and we're going to talk about how do we report this information out in a useful manner. So we have the ability to report on any of the data that you have in here. So we've already talked about we can bidirectionally sync with the model. Now let's show that bidirectional data in reports. So I'm going to click on this report tool. We talked about room data, so I'm going to go to a room data report. And rather than print out the entire project, I'm going to just pick that dental department we've been working in. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to hit generate. And it has pushed it off onto my other screen. So we're going to come into here. This is going to push out a out-of-the-box version of a room data report for the entire department. It took about 7 seconds. It's 88 pages. And this is showing us all of this information on 8.5 by 11s. You'll notice that the tabs that we had are correlating to different sections in this report. And as we scroll down, we can see the different tabs. What's the values of these? What's the check boxes? These could be printed off on paper if we needed to. If we didn't, we just leave them as PDFs and email them around the project. And this is what we could take to user group meetings to review with the owners to make sure that we're on track on the project and that they're getting what they want. But sky's the limit when it comes to data. I can make these reports look any way I want. So remember in your head that this is what this report looked like. This is the out-of-the-box version, right? It has our dRofus logo and so on. That could be your logo. I'm going to show some other examples. So I've got some open. We're going to go to this one first. This is to just show the fact that it could be completely different in appearance, right? This is just showing little boxes where the yes and no's are instead of check boxes, they're filled in. And this is showing the exact same information presented in a completely different way. Depending on what your firm's standards are and how you guys like to do your graphics and so on. We're going to go to the next level of a room data sheet. We're going to take an extreme project. This was a project that was done in the Middle East. It was a little over 5.5 million square feet. I think it was over 10,000 rooms. And in this project, they had to track everything. So this is kind of the extreme aspect of all of the information that you could track for a project. And then in addition, when we get down to here, and this is something we haven't talked about, all of these rooms have floor plans, ceiling plans, interior elevations, and axons. The floor plans and the ceiling plans, those are automatically cropped and generated by dRofus, extracted from Revit, put into the database, and put on the report in an automated fashion. The interior elevations, a person does have to create the first version, but then as the model updates, the updated version of those is automated by dRofus. Same as the axon. And so the key part to this, and a very important part to the reports here, is there's no photoshopping. There's no InDesign or manipulation of Word. These are algorithmic reports, meaning the data comes out, you've set rules in the report, and every single time that report comes out, it can come out to scale in the center of the screen, and you can regenerate this report over and over and over again without having to spend weeks of preparing different deliverables for your owners. So that's the data sheet portion to it. We're going to go to, here's a really quick example. I won't spend a lot of time on it, a sheet report. So this is the idea that we can connect to Revit sheets as well. And you'll notice these are a bunch of different views on one room. And if you zoom into this, and I've got to zoom in on Adobe, this is showing updated dRofus information inside the Revit sheet that gets printed out. So we're able to push and pull that as well. The final one is it's not just rooms, obviously, it's anything. So in this one, this is the owner of this facility required that they know who installed and who delivers each piece of equipment. They wanted a cut sheet for each one. They wanted to know what the properties of that were. They wanted to know what its upholsteries and finishes were, and that's included as well in this report. They wanted to know how many they needed to order, and they wanted to know what rooms it needed to be installed with. All of this data is already inside of the dRofus database. All of your team is already working on this one database in conjunction with your Revit models, and they're all on the same page. So printing the report literally is coming in here and hitting generate. You just have to have the report set up the way you want the very first time. Once you have a report set up on one project, you can carry that over to future projects, right? So you could have an office standard, a set of reports that you guys print. You could have a set of reports for just one owner. It's the University of, Georgia or whatever it may be. You could say that's going to be the report that they require and they want it in this format. And that's for the PDF side of things. But my favorite personally is the ability to generate Excel reports. And the reason it's my favorite is because of the power of how quickly you can generate these reports and the fact that the dRofus database is smart enough to remember the formatting that you used. Let me explain that. When the information comes out of dRofus, it comes out in a typical database format, which is thousands of rows and columns of ridiculous amounts of data that are completely illegible to anybody because there's so much. But if you took this data and you created different tabs that isolated using filters and pivot tables, information you wanted to see. And so right here, this is an airport, and they went through and they said, we want to validate the program, the design versus the program, and we want to do it per department. So let's click on the baggage claim, show me where we're at. Here's my programmed area, here's my design, and we're over by that much, right? So we can start to see that. Or let me go into the check-in area. How's that department doing? We can pull this up in a meeting, and it's dynamically adjustable. When I talked about the fact that you can save this into the database, once you get this all set up exactly how you want, the font, the formatting, the color, it's remembered. You don't have to recreate this report from scratch every single time you want to generate it. You'll come back into dRofus, you'll go to the Excel portion of this, you'll click on the report you want, and you'll hit generate, and it will remember that it's supposed to create 4 more tabs, it's supposed to create these tables, and it's supposed to color code it in this manner. And that's a really powerful tool in terms of creating a report once in Excel and be able to use it over and over again to make sure your project teams are on the same page. All right, so we've talked about Revit, we've talked about dRofus, how the two connect, we've talked about data, we've talked about reports. The final piece of this puzzle, if you really want to get your teams to program and plan inside of dRofus, is they have to have the visual aspects from dRofus in the database. And if they can't do that, well, then there's a link in the chain. And so what we're going to talk about here is I'm going to go into Revit. I'm going to go into the dRofus tab here. And there's a button right here that says upload to IFC. Now, all IFC is a read-only version of the Revit model. It's an open source platform that is standard across the BIM world. And it's basically taking the BIM model and it's going to export that out. And notice there's no settings. It exports it and uploads it into the dRofus server by simply clicking the button. And once that's done, and I've already done it, so we're not going to do it, and you go into here, and we're going to go back to the home screen, and I'm going to go back here. I'm going to turn on that viewer, and here it is. And of course, I think it has disconnected. So what we're going to do during my demonstrations, we're going to reconnect the IFC viewer. There we go. And we're going to pull it out so you can get a bigger view of this. And we're going to talk about how we can start to filter data. So right now we have the dental department selected, and it's isolating or showing all the rooms in that dental department. If I wanted to go to the janitorial department, and again, because of my demo and the kink I had before with the logs, what I'm going to do really quickly is completely close out, and you're going to also see how quickly it is to jump out of dRofus and back in again. And we're going to jump back in right now, and it's going to pop up that login screen again, right here. And once that opens up, it's going to open up under the home screen. And what I'm going to do is just reconnect to the IFC model, and then we'll show it again. So we'll click on the rooms here. And there it's already trying to open that up, but it wants me to connect, so I have to just hit reconnect. And we're going to click on the dental department. And there we go. We isolated the rooms in the dental department. Here I'm going to click on the janitors department. And notice the gray boxes, it's isolating the janitor's closet. I'm going to go to the administration department. It's isolated the administration department. If I go back to that dental department and I click on one of these rooms, it's going to isolate what room it is that I'm talking about and show me the properties on it. And this is visualizing across 3 Revit models in one location. If I double click on that, it's going to zoom me into that room. If I click on any one of these pieces of equipment, I can pull up the item data on that piece of equipment. If I click this one-to-one check, and that's going to open up a room here. Now what I'm going to do is dock this so that we can get a better view. We'll put it right here. This is going to model down here. This is going to do that same variation check of what's in the database versus what's in the model. We're going to pull this over a little bit here. You'll see that right here. And so it's saying where we have any issues. So there's 2 in the database, there's 2 in the model, we're good to go. Here we've got an issue. There's 2 in the database that we're supposed to have, there's only 1 in the model. And so it's saying that we have an issue here. Vice versa here. And so this is a very powerful tool if we want to start to go through on somebody who doesn't have access to Revit, or maybe is intimidated to use a powerful modeling tool like that. They can use a powerful database tool, but since it's the interface similar to Excel, it's much easier to understand. It's also much easier to mass edit rooms. I can sort my rooms, and I can make changes across an entire department of all room types at once. And I can select and make those changes. I can see the variation counts across all those different rooms. Notice that all these rooms are selected, and now we're going through here. Additionally, if we want to go back all the way into the early programming and planning, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. We're going to kind of pull this over and pull this up. I can go through here. I'm going to click on the project right here. And we're going to go through and notice it's going to select all of the rooms right here. And although I did that, it's going to go through and I can see the areas in here. Where is my gross versus net, my gross net factors across departments. And because we can connect to Revit areas, the actual tracing of it, for the first time, we can validate our gross net factors. Are they real? At a planning level, when I'm saying the gross net factor is 1.25, is it really, or is it 1.255 or 1.26? And that starts to become very, very effective tool of making sure that we're developing and designing more efficient buildings. So I thank you for your guys' time. I've gone through a very big walkthrough of dRofus. Really quick before we open it up to questions, I do want to mention the fact that we now have an iPad app, essentially, Android app, where you can open and access all of this dRofus information on a tablet on site if you wanted to. You'll notice it's showing up some statistical data. This tool is focused very heavily towards the project managers and the owners of a project, so they can see where the status and the progression of this project is. So this is looking at the templates placed across the room. Are we on track? This is going through door lists. We're not created, so we're very far behind in this demo project. And so we can start to see where we're at in terms of project and planning. It's going to look very similar. I can go to any one of these, click through here, and I can see the exact same data that we could see on our desktop app. I can now open up an iPad and go through it and access it that way. So at this point, I'll open up to questions. I have not looked at any of them, so I hope we have some. But that is what we're going to go through today.
All right, we do have a couple of questions. If you have any questions, please type those in now. The first one is dRofus only for large or complex building? What is the minimum size project that would make sense to use dRofus with?
Yeah, so to answer that one, no, it definitely is not for only for large and complex buildings. I demoed in the presentation some very large and complex buildings. My previous life, I worked at an architectural firm in Lincoln, Nebraska. So if anybody knows where that is in the middle of nowhere, we worked on extremely small projects and we used dRofus on all of them. So projects as small as 10,000 square foot clinic renovations or office updates, it made sense. The smaller the project, the less the software cost, the larger, the more the software costs. It is priced to allow for the usage on smaller projects, for sure.
That's great. And how do you get all of the rooms and data into dRofus? Is it manual entry only?
Yeah, so everything that I showed in here was opening up different fields and clicking on them and typing information in. And I mentioned early on in the PowerPoint application that we're bidirectional with Excel. So there's multiple ways. Using any information that you already have in an Excel file, we can pull that in just as a starting point. So if you already programmed the project in Excel, we can pull that in to create the project in the rooms. Or if you've already started a plan inside of Revit, we talked about how you can push and pull. We could grab all of the rooms from Revit and push those into a completely empty dRofus database. We could grab any parameter from any of the families that was relevant. We could pull that in as well. So you don't have to manually input everything. You can grab it from existing data. And then once you have a project done, future projects of similar types, you can just simply copy the database. So if I created an office that's 4 stories for a particular client, and they decided they want to build 4 more of those around the city, I already have my starting point. I just copy the database over and I have all my rooms already in there, the typical equipment that's supposed to go in there. And now I can start to go through and create project templates, not just room templates, but entire project type templates. So yeah, very efficient way of managing projects.
Great. And how much training does it usually take to get a project team up and running?
That's a pretty loaded question because it depends on the project type. And it depends on what the team wants to do, if it's a project or if they're going, on an enterprise level. On a typical project, I would guesstimate somewhere between 8 and 24 hours. So 1 to 3 days, we could have the database completely set up and your entire team trained. Now, if we were going into a very large implementation across an international firm in multiple offices, that's obviously going to take longer. And if we had a specific project, it's just for a clinic or a renovation somewhere, it could take us a little as a day.